It is Saturday, May 17th. You know, I always wondered why Raynard and Dr. Quartey and Andrew, I always wondered why George Clooney came out so hard demanding that Biden should step aside in the 2024 election, and why he wrote that tough op-ed in the New York Times. Well, guess what? Have you guys heard of Original Sin by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson? Well, guess what? Come to find out, and you don't find these things out until much later, that when they held the fundraiser for Biden at Mr. Clooney's place, Biden didn't recognize him, had no idea who he was. Clueless, had no idea. The whole night, by the way. So, Joe Biden's apparent physical and mental decline, gentlemen, his fateful decision to run for re-election, and the Democratic Party's unwillingness, Raynard, we remember so well, to question that decision, until it was too late, are all back in the news in a big-time way, thanks to a new book due out next week from Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. In Original Sin, President Biden's decline, his cover-up, and his disastrous choice to run again is all recounted in this book. And I noticed Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, the leaders of the Democratic Party right now, were asked about this book, and they said, we're looking forward. We're not going backwards. But the mainstream media said, not so fast. You got to give an accounting of his age and the fact that you lied to the American people that he was in tip-top shape, that he was not in decline, and he was not having cognitive issues, Raynard.
Yeah, what I find amazing is the media is now trying to exonerate itself. Jake Tapper being one of the main culprits on national TV every night during the campaign.
Defending him.
Yes, exactly. And remember we had Lord Trump on, he said, I'm offended that you're trying to make a medical diagnosis from the TV. And Jake Tapper knew Biden's condition because he has sources in the White House, and Jake Tapper also saw visually himself in person. So the whole media circle is lying about this whole thing, and now they want to throw themselves behind the cover of this book. Bull crap, Armstrong.
Andrew?
What happened here is
tell us why this matters, why this conversation needs to be had.
It matters a lot because we're going to do this again if we keep electing, very older people to high federal office. We've seen this in the Senate. Now we're seeing it in the White House. And we got to be honest here, too. People on the Republican side, you might want to kind of pay attention to how you're getting grief on the Team Blue side for this, because Donald Trump's not getting any younger either. Here's the problem. Joe Biden had a long history of his ego. He has 40-plus years in public service. Everybody knows Joe Biden has a big ego. You remember the Sheriff Joe jokes that President Obama cracked. We knew he was going to have a hard time letting go of power. When he started to decline, though, because people disliked President Trump so much, he got this cloak of hagiography where all of a sudden there was nothing ever wrong with Joe Biden ever. And politics, especially partisan politics, does this to people. And this is just a very clear example of it, because everybody knows what Joe Biden looks like, sounds like, talks like. It was very clear, and especially down to the debate, which was the breaking point on this. By the way, Jake Tapper was one of the debate moderators, so he knew this up close and personal. This is what happens when you hagiography somebody just because the other guy's bad. They got stuck in a trap of it. Joe Biden fed it with his own ego, and here we be. And we're going to do it again if we don't learn the lessons.
Professor Quartey, I mean, if Biden had won a second term, they debated they would have to put him in a wheelchair. Should the American people have known about this? Should they have been made aware?
Well, the American people should know the health and wellness of their president, and there are some serious questions that have been raised, and the question is whether or not this book answers those questions. There are over 200 sources of this book, many of them anonymous sources, and so take it with a grain of salt. But, Joe Biden has not been shy about saying he's not who he used to be. He's an older man, and as a result, he may move a little slower. He may talk a little slower. This is a president that has a stutter and has had a stutter well before he became president. And
Are you insinuating that he was not in decline?
I'm suggesting that we may be overstating what it means by decline.
What is the definition of decline, Dr. Quartey?
Well, I think what is being proposed is that this president was somehow suffering from early stages of dementia, of Parkinson's disease. There is nothing in the medical records that are public record that suggests that he had Parkinson's or was experiencing dementia, right? And so what do we mean by cognitive decline? Look, Armstrong, we're all going to get old.
But I'm not, we're not talking about you and I. We're talking about Joe Biden.
Well,
Let's talk about Joe Biden.
But we're talking about a human.
We're talking about Joe Biden.
But we're talking about a human being who happened to be our president, one of the oldest presidents, and now Donald Trump is one of the oldest presidents to serve, right? I mean, let's be realistic. You know, do we expect him to miss a step from time to time? Perhaps, but the question is to what extent? To what extent? To what extent?
I find it amazing because you're a good guy, Pepperdine professor. I get it. Mm-hmm. Republicans would be doing the same thing with Donald Trump. They would defend him to the end if he had cognitive skills. And there lies the issue, is that we become more loyal to a party and a label instead of what is in the best interest of we the people.
Well, let me just say, I'm not here to defend President Biden. I'm just sharing what has been publicly reported. And as somebody who covered the Biden-Harris White House the last couple years, as somebody who saw the president in action a number of times, you know, there were plenty of examples of him just being old, being an old president. But not one moment did I think, oh my gosh, there's a sign of dementia.
Every moment I saw him, I saw a sign of dementia. I saw it in his eyes. Everybody could see it. The American people. I mean, it's obvious. If you have grandparents, you have relatives who are old, it's just there. But listen, the bottom line is this. Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson knew about this long before their book, the research. They're trying to claim some sense of credibility, like you say. Here's the question I want to start out with you on. How did Qatar spend billions of dollars to influence the USA, the fact that President Trump was in Qatar? Literally, it was bought. They spent a lot of money. And they're some of the biggest perpetrators of terrorism, infiltrating our universities, supporting terrorist organizations all across the country, and yet our president of the United States was there recently.
Yeah, President Trump is still in the Middle East. He made a lot of news at the White House right before he left, making very clear he didn't think anything was wrong about accepting this gift, this $400 million jet, jumbo jet, palace in the sky from the Qataris.
I'm asking about Qatar now. I'm asking, how is it that Qatar has become so successful, given their reputation, that they were able to get the President of the United States for a visit?
Well, I mean, I think there's a long relationship there. There's a long relationship between the Qatar and the United States from both Democratic and Republican administrations, right? Slow and steady wins the race. They've been investing in America over a long period of time.
And they have a huge military base.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, here's the thing, Raynard. There is no question Trump is business. But what does it say to our allies? What does it say to Israel? It has a lot of people up in arms. No matter what the outcome.
Intended.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm sure when you're dealing with foreign policy, you're not dealing with Mother Teresa type sovereign countries. Qatar does a lot of our dirty work. So reminiscent, Armstrong, of the movie A Few Good Men. Jack Nicholson, the famous soliloquy, "You need me on that wall. You want me on that wall." Qatar provides services to our government and our national interests that if the general public knew half of it would be repulsed. They are the Suge Knight of the Middle East. And they're vital to our national security interests because they are a middleman for us and our interests that a sitting president legally cannot engage in. So we call Qatar, and they do our dirty work.
You know, Andrew, I must tell you, when it was announced that he was going to shake the hand of Shara, the Syrian president, and then he was going to meet with the Syrian president. I must tell you, it really weighed heavily. But then I saw what happened in Syria when Trump announced that the sanctions were going to be lifted. I saw the joy and the praise for the United States of America and for Donald Trump. Because oftentimes when we levy these sanctions against countries, the people that we're trying to harm and send a message to are never the ones to have to suffer as a result of the consequences of the sanctions, but everyday people. And they really put a human face on just how much they've been suffering. I didn't realize these sanctions have been for almost 20 years, but the joy and the freedom and the hope that they have and the praise for the United States, maybe in all the world, when we hear about what's going on in the world and all the conflict, that is a light that can give us a hope that there's another approach to reining in the chaos that continues to reign throughout the world.
Yeah, underneath all the geopolitics, the Syrian people have suffered tremendously, and we don't talk enough about it. Even the conservative estimates since the 2011, the current version of the civil war kicked off, you're talking at least 500,000 people dead, cities leveled. It's just been terrible. So the idea of investment in that country to help those people and dropping the sanctions is a fantastic thing for those folks, because Syria historically is a pretty developed country. They're strategically important. They're on the Mediterranean. Here's the thing you have to kind of do the TBD, because al-Shara isn't the first militant to win power at the point of the gun. However, he has shown himself to be very shrewd in making friends and getting a lot of outside support and a lot of money. And the GCC, which is the Gulf meeting that Trump dropped in the middle of, because that's why he can meet all these people all at once, including the Qataris and the Saudis. It's not the Qatari Benevolent Fund. It's not the Saudi Benevolent Fund. It's not the Turkish Benevolent Fund. It's the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund. It's the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. They are investing in him in this country for a reason. They expect to get a return on investment, and this transitional government is supposed to be for 5 years. We're going to have to see, is this really a transitional government, and then they'll have elections and try to do something at least semi-democratic, or is this just a prelude to the next dictatorship funded by a new group of folks by the GCC backing it? That's the questions to ask. But yes, the people should have hope right now, but we should have a leery eye because of the people involved in it and have a clear-eyed approach to the whole thing.
You know, you were mentioning the discomfort with this $400 million jet, which is now being shared by Republicans across the spectrum in the House and the Senate, because this would be one of the largest gifts ever. And obviously, the aircraft, it's going to have to be retrofitted, and by the time that's all done, Trump would never have his hands on it, except maybe at the Trump Library. But the Qataris have said there's still details that are in the works. It's not clear as to whether this is a gift or not.
Well, look, we certainly saw a number of members of Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, respond to this, and they're not too crazy about this idea either. We're not forgetting the security challenge that this poses. You know, whenever we get the plane, if we get the plane has to be stripped down and basically rebuilt. And so, yeah, it's a $400 million gift, but by the time it's all said and done, we're going to spend well over $1 billion to retrofit this pet project for President Trump. And so, you know, a lot of American people are right to wonder, you know, well, what about us? He was elected to create a better economy. He was elected to slow inflation. And this seems like a distraction. Nobody's talking about the bread and butter issues that are important to most Americans. Folks are talking about this palace in the sky, and I don't think that's going to bode well in the long run for President Trump and his agenda.
It is Saturday. Well, I think we all agree on the aircraft. I think Andrew, Raynard, we all agree on the aircraft. Let us be clear, okay? I think it's insane, to say the least. Back with much more with our guests. I'm Armstrong Williams. Stay tuned. I must admit, President Trump was looking forward to going on to Turkey to continue the talks between Putin and Zelensky. But Putin decided not to show up. He decided to send a second-tier negotiating team instead, and as a result, Trump says nothing is moving forward until he and Putin sit down and talk. Is this going anywhere, Andrew? I had hope, but man, I'm concerned as to whether there's no end to this conflict in sight right now.
Yeah, I long since quit being gobsmacked when it comes to foreign policy under the current world and dispensation time we live in. However, you can smack the gob over anybody thinking that Putin was actually going to show up to this thing. He won't even have meetings at the same table with anybody. There's no way he was going to travel, especially then. Remember, Erdogan, if he's brokering this thing in Turkey, he's kind of playing both sides against the middle. Putin doesn't fully trust him. There was no way Putin was going to show up to this thing, so I'm kind of baffled at the coverage to start with. So as far as the coverage of it goes, yeah, this wasn't going to happen. I'm sure Trump's people really didn't want him going to that. I know he got his way to go to do the Qatar meeting. But yeah, this was just a bad idea all the way around. I know that Zelensky and them really, really are pushing to try to get some kind of momentum here, but this wasn't it. And I'm probably going to be glad in the long run this didn't pan out.
You know, Raynard, there's a big case before the Supreme Court, birthright citizenship. And they're headed towards the end of the term in June. Where do you think this is going? I think there's precedent to sort of give you an indication of where it's going, though.
Right, I think there are two arguments being made today. Birthright is kind of a minor issue within this. This is all about whether one judge can issue a nationwide injunction to stop a presidential policy. I think that's what the courts are going to decide probably next week or next month. I don't think they're going to give us a final answer on birthright, even though I think the Constitution is clear that birthright was specific to black folk after the Emancipation Proclamation. And as usual, liberals took their liberties to make it apply to illegals in the country and giving them citizenship. And that's a prostitution of what that law says back in the 1800s.
You know, Dr. Kurt, you know, the Trump immigration is colliding with due process. Who will be the eventual winner?
Well, you know, we hope that it's due process because that impacts every single American. You know, look, as a member of the press, you know, there's a due process. If somebody has a grievance and something that we said on air, something that we wrote about, right? And when folks get to skip over, people in power, people in government, get to skip over our due process. They get to pick and choose, you know, who gets a process and who doesn't. I don't think the American people want to live in that America. It's encouraging to know that there are a number of judges thus far who have ruled that the Trump administration needs to release, you know, students that they have detained, claiming that they posed a risk to America, claiming that you know, they had somehow run afoul in terms of the laws that govern this country. The courts have thus far said, wait a minute, due process has to stand. But the Trump administration has been very slow in adhering to these court orders. And so hence the constitutional crisis that the American people keep hearing about.
So Andrew, help us understand where we are in terms of tariffs with China, with Europe, with Canada, with Mexico. It's been so many, and you know, one thing that the market does not enjoy and doesn't respond well to is instability. It has been so unstable, so erratic. So in a nutshell, where are we?
I don't know. You don't know either. The administration kind of doesn't know because it's all just in the center of the whirlwind right now. You just hit on it. The second worst thing you can do economically is to have bad economic policy. The number one worst thing you can do with economic policy is to have uncertainty. Nobody can deal with uncertainty. Nobody can plan anything. The downside to Donald Trump, the deal maker, is he loves these tariffs, and it's not really a policy thing. He likes it because he finally has his lifelong goal. The entire physical world revolves around him and his deal making and his whims and what he wants to do. The problem is logistical supply chains, especially those 45, 50-day trips from Asia to the West Coast of the U.S., can't run like that. And you're going to get a lot of what's called bullwhip effects in the supply chain. You see what the market reacts. We now see, and we've got to call it what it is, we see a pattern now. Friday night, Saturday, they do releases trying to goose up that Monday morning market number. That's what they're doing. That's not good policy. It feeds the uncertainty. Now, they're starting to back off it a little bit, but there's still going to be repercussions from what they did 45, 50 days ago that are just now starting to hit the consumer market. This thing's going to take a while to settle down, and if they don't back off this tariff thing, these bullwhip effects are going to create bigger and bigger waves, and it's just going to make a bigger and bigger mess. So that's where we are. But where we're going, nobody really knows if they're going to be honest about it.
You know, Raynard, there is a shifting realignment in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Syria, Trump extended the olive branch to Iran while he was there. Israel has been.
Unlock your iPhone first.
Shut up. Israel has been totally. I did like that. Israel has been totally solid on all this. I mean, you got the Saudis loving this. You got Trump in Qatar. And Europe is looking. Asia is looking. Everybody's looking. How is this going to play out?
Well, number one, I think people need to give Trump credit. This is showing a lot of maturity from his first term to this term, where he wasn't so bombastic and emotional in his approach to foreign policy. He is doing what I call some very mature things, foreign policy. Syria. The sanction regime had been on them for over 20 years. The new president who took over from Assad had nothing to do with the policies of Syria the past 20 years.
And he cut his ties with Al-Qaeda in 2016. That's
exactly.
just a fact.
So Trump is saying, hey, we're going to throw you a carrot to see how you respond. And if you respond favorably, then we'll continue to remove the tariffs. But if you start going back to your old ways, we can always reassert the tariff. That's a mature leader as far as foreign policy. And isn't it amazing also that you have Europe? They're nowhere to be found. And Trump has got them backed into a corner, and Trump is in control of foreign policy.
You know, I'm finally happy that we're going to finally talk about Trump's policies with South Africa. Rayhaan Surve is in studio from Cape Town, who also lives in the UK. So we're going to finally have a very candid conversation about this. From someone who lives there, we're going to deal with facts versus reality. That's coming up next. But I cannot close out this conversation with my guest. That P. Diddy trial, the things I'm hearing, I don't know if I'm naive, if I'm a Puritan. I never knew people were capable of such.
Stop on.
Stop me.
Stop.
You think it's propaganda?
No, let me tell you something. I had this very heated conversation last night with a group of women.
Lay back. Let's see where this is going. Hold up. Go ahead.
The first time, if you to believe Cassie Ventura about all the things Sean did to her, it's his fault. The second time is her fault because she was in a relationship with him for north of 15 years.
Wait a minute. I never said about who the blame was. I'm just saying the things that I'm hearing that people are doing and that is being broadcast
but
to the world.
obviously she was happy with it, or she
was not happy
back.
with it.
Why would she go back for 15 years?
There are a number of victims of domestic violence that go back for a host of different reasons. You cannot sit here and say that a human being signed up to be treated
I
that
agree
way,
with
to
him,
be
by the way.
abused
Raynard, keep going
that
back.
way.
Raynard, maybe it's conditioning.
15, 20 years, Armstrong?
Raynard, I understand, but listen, I feel...
Look at how long Tina Turner was in a relationship with
abused.
Ike. That didn't make the abuse right.
Oh,
She did not enjoy
Sigmund
it.
Freud said people get utility, both negative and positive,
that's
out of their,
unserious. That's
those
unserious.
behaviors.
That's
and so,
unserious.
but why would a person go back for 15, 20 years when you know so, and you have the door
So
open
who are
to
we
you?
blaming here now?
So you're victim shaming?
Wait.
No. I'm telling you the truth. Because if Cassie didn't like it, she would have got her butt up and left after the first time.
Andrew, please let me hear your voice in this, because I didn't expect this, by the way.
Well, if you told 1995 15-year-old Andrew, who had just discovered hip-hop because we got Fox and then Living Color started pumping that into, the hillbillies like us, so we finally figured out what that stuff was. If you told us Biggie and Tupac would both be dead and 30 years later that it turned out that Sean Combs, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, was the real monster of the group, man, that guy would have been just amazed at the whole thing. Funny how things work out, ain't it?
Well, I'm glad you brought that. This guy beat the living daylights out of her, but he said he never hit her. He never laid a finger on her until you saw the video. I mean, she was afraid. She was frightened. I mean,
Leave, Armstrong, leave. 15 years?
Sir, when we saw the video of P. Diddy at the hotel, what was she trying to do? He was trying to leave.
One time.
And guess what? He came out of the hotel room and snatched her up and dragged her
By
back
her
into
hair.
that room.
You think that's the first time he's done that to her?
no, of course not.
That's my whole point.
But why are you justifying abuse? Why are you justifying Diddy's
Because if she didn't
Diddy's
like it, she
behavior?
would have left
It's bad
permanently.
behavior. It's toxic behavior. Now the question
Would you
is,
say this is your sister?
Yes, I will, and I've told him that.
Oh.
I've told him as much.
God bless your sister.
I would defend you the first time. I would go after anybody. But if you stay in a toxic relationship like that,
You
obviously
should
you're getting something
defend
out
a
of it.
victim every single time.
Let me tell you what's interesting.
Every single time.
Let me tell you what's interesting about this. Garrigus, his lawyer, they're now saying, well, he was an abuser. He was a monster, but he didn't traffic anybody. Even now, they have to admit that this guy was brutal. He was a monster.
Without question.
He should not be on the streets. I'm
Armstrong,
sorry.
why would you keep going back knowing what awaits you when you walk through
Here's
that
the problem
door?
with that. Seems like everybody went back.
Yeah, because of the money, the fortune, and the fame, and the lifestyle. Come on, these women today, Armstrong, are not as puritanical as back in the old days.
Back
They
in
knew
the old
exactly
days,
what they were doing, yeah.
puritanical women?
Yeah.
Okay, puritanical women.
So,
That's what
so
we're
let
going
me.
with.
Here's the question. Here's the question. So, if you were a juror, you would acquit him?
No, he's guilty, in my view, of what she's alleging. But I'm not going to sit up here and make Cassie into a sympathetic
Yes, so-
figure.
so-
Armstrong, I would take a different take. So far, this is just 1 week. We've got 7 more weeks to go in this case. It seems clear that Puff Daddy, that P. Diddy, he engaged in abuse of Cassie. It was far-reaching. But the question remains, is he guilty of the RICO charges that the prosecution is going after him with? That is still yet to be determined. If you pay attention to the social media chatter, if you pay attention to some of the reporters on the scene, they're saying that the prosecution has been slow out of the gates. And so, yes, Diddy is guilty of doing some pretty heinous things, it looks like, at least in the court of public opinion. But when it comes to those RICO charges, it's still to be determined.
But everyone knew who Puff Daddy was. This is no secret in Hollywood.
Everybody did not know who Diddy was.
Women?
Everybody did not see those tapes that were released.
They didn't need to see it. His reputation preceded. R. Kelly, same thing. Everyone knew, don't bring a 12-year-old girl
And
around
where's R. Kelly?
Right, but I don't want to hear all these women trying to get a payday 20 years, 30 years
This is not about women
after the
trying to
fact.
get a payday. This is about holding folks accountable for their behavior.
Hold them accountable, but these women are just as complicit as Puff Daddy and R. Kelly.
We're not putting the victims on trial.
They need
Diddy
to be.
is on trial.
They need to be. Why did that, to this day, yesterday some other women came out against Puff Daddy in another lawsuit. Why are they able to file these lawsuits under the name Anonymous? No, call them out. You're calling them out publicly, put your name on it.
Well, here's what I'm going to say. I believe it's free speech. I asked the question, and I have a lot of respect for Raynard, but I don't think Raynard is saying acquit Puff Daddy, put it back out on the street to continue his behavior, but there's responsibility and accountability everywhere.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think you're defending Puff
No,
Daddy.
oh, no question,
You're
no
not
question.
defending Puff Daddy. I want to be very clear on this. And you know what? Listen, accountability and responsibility matters, but a real man, would never hit a woman. A real man would never turn a woman.
And a real woman would not keep going back to a man that
real
does
man,
hit her.
no, I'm gonna put this on men now. Men impact women, okay? Women sometimes do things they would not ordinarily do that satisfy a man. Men have to be more responsible and accountable. I think most men I know would never engaged in the kind of behavior P. Diddy engaged in.
I agree.
So I'm not going to further make the woman the victim, but I got to tell you something. This is a very sad situation to watch.
But she is a victim. She is a victim. We're not making her into a victim. She is a victim.
Is Diddy a victim because of his childhood and how he grew up and what he was exposed to?
Well, let's see what comes out in the trial. It's only been 1 week. We have 7 more weeks to go, right? But it's clear that Diddy settled with Cassie.
$30 million. And that's what started his problems when he settled. And now Greg's telling me I got to break. I got to get out of here. Rayhaan is up next. You guys be the judge. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Rayhaan, your parents have given you one of the best educations that any young person can have. Oxford, you're deputy chairman and head of the portfolio investments for the family business, Sekunjalo Group. You guys in the media, technology, and you grew up in Cape Town, South Africa. There's so much in the news today about Cape Town, South Africa, and I really appreciate having you on today and in our studios. What was it like growing up in South Africa?
Firstly, thank you so much for having me, Armstrong. It's a real pleasure, and I've really enjoyed, continuing the relationship between the US and South Africa and helping the narrative there. In terms of what was it like growing up in Cape Town in South Africa, it was a time just after apartheid that I grew up in, and it was a time of new opportunity, both economically, both for cultures and communities to engage. And Cape Town is very much that. It's this complete representation of multiple cultures and a melting pot in many ways. It's the place where people come to engage, to share dinner, to share their different traditions and their religion and their different spirituality. And that to me was what growing up in Cape Town was about. Multiculturality and no boundaries for any engagement.
Did you experience any of the harsh racism, any of the bigotry?
Of course. South Africa, we're a very young democracy. It's only been 31 years since the apartheid government ended. So racism still exists in our society, but more importantly, the people in South Africa have a bigger mission to go beyond racism. And racism is still a component of the society, but it's a small and ever decreasing component of society.
Our president, Donald Trump, called attention to land seizures and violence against white farmers in South Africa. Was his warning based on fact? Was it politically motivated? Or is it that our government just did not have all the necessary information?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question and very topical at the moment. I want to start by saying in South Africa, we have a lot of crime. And crime happens to everyone, regardless of whether you're white or whether you're black, what part of the country you're in. It happens to everyone. And my ambition and my hope is that we can eradicate crime in the country as a whole. Now, land ownership in South Africa is a very important distinction in terms of understanding where these reforms and where this government and engagement, international virality of the situation has come from, in that less than 10% of the population is white, and yet they own more than 70% of the land in South Africa. So when we talk about crime against landowners, we're talking about crime against 8% of the population that own 70% of the land in South Africa. And that is a very important context. However, that doesn't make the crime right.
How did the president's stance in South Africa differ from previous U.S. foreign policy, particularly regarding human rights and property rights?
It's a good question as well, because what's taken over the media at the moment in South Africa and in the world as well is that we had the Expropriation Act passed at the beginning of this year. And what that act entails is expropriation of land without compensation. And on its face value, that's a very scary thing. But there's due process in South Africa that allows us to be able to have just and equitable compensation. In fact, it's a part of our constitution, a constitution that South Africans hold up very strongly. And it's a constitution that states that any land expropriation in South Africa must have just and equitable compensation. And I can very confidently say that there have been no cases of expropriation without compensation in South Africa. And there have only been cases of expropriation of land in South Africa over the last 31 years with compensation.
Is it true that there is genocide against white farmers in South Africa?
To me, again, this comes back to the question of crime in South Africa. It's not about race. Crime in South Africa is about economic condition. We simply have a widespread impoverished nation at the moment. Unemployment is incredibly high in our country, sitting above 30%. We have a very wide income inequality, and that means that crime is rampant. That doesn't mean necessarily that it applies to one race or the other, but when we look at statistics, and as I mentioned, the ownership, it's very easy to write the narrative out of that, but it doesn't capture what's really happening in the country. And that's why when things like white genocide are put in the headlines, alongside these types of statistics, they go viral. Yet, it's simply not the case. There's no white genocide in South Africa. People live together, people are very welcoming each other, and most importantly, people in South Africa want to work together, regardless of race. So when we talk about this, it's really taking a very small part of the crime statistics in South Africa and extrapolating it into something that's much bigger than it really is.
What has been the reaction of certain skillful white farmers being given refuge here in the United States, and what is so unique about their skills?
I'll start with the second part of that question, in that the skilled workers and farmers in South Africa are very much of any race. However, due to the land ownership, the landowners, majoritarily being farm workers who are white, do represent a very large part of that skill as well. So when you come back to the first part of that question and the reaction on the ground in South Africa and to this case of refugees coming across, it hasn't really been about the genocide. It's about representing the small part of the population that has been wronged. You know, if we look at the crime statistics, it's there, but turning it into something that really shouldn't have ever gotten to this stage. And this is a South African issue that should be dealt with by South Africans. We've always appreciated the support of the US and the US administrations over many years, whether it was President Trump in the first 2016 term, or the presidents going far as back as President Ronald Reagan, who was under his administration that they passed the Anti-Apartheid Act in 1986. Now, he vetoed that that act initially. However, he eventually came to pass it because it was the American people that actually supported the South African people. It was a bipartisan act that went through Congress. And everyone in the US supported the liberation movement of South Africa. And that only happened less than 40 years ago.
Is our president, in taking this position on white genocide in South Africa, shining a necessary spotlight on a complex issue? Because if it were not for that, you and I would not be discussing it right now. Because there are a lot of misperceptions. I mean, here in the United States, I'm sure you had things that were said to you that the United States is not safe. They got crime, they're killing each other. You're coming here. And sometimes what you have to do is sit down and have conversations with people like yourself who live there every day and experience that and knows the truth versus the headlines in the media.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a necessary something that we need to put in the spotlight and have a discussion on?
Crime is always necessary to put in the spotlight. But this particular topic has been put in the spotlight in the wrong type of way. So I don't disagree that crime against farmers, crime in South Africa should be in the spotlight. I think that it must, because we need to change that. However, this part of it, I don't believe that should be in the spotlight in this type of narrative. I would rather like to see a collaboration between the governments, between the South African people and the US people, to work together in solving it, rather than turning this into a very large and complex issue itself, which then turns into a degradation of relations between our countries.
Wow, Rayhaan Surve is our guest. We'll be back with much more. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Welcome back to the broadcast. What industries in Africa, particularly in South Africa, are currently offering the most promising investment opportunities?
In Africa in general, and specifically in South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, one of the most promising industries is actually technology. And that's a reflection not of the transition away from natural resources, but a reflection of the fact that in Africa, we have the largest youth population, and that population is only growing. Across the continent, by 2030 or 2035, I believe, we're going to have over 1 billion people in the youth age.
And how do you define youth? What age group?
So that age between 18 to 35.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Why is that? Simply the makeup of Africa and how we've evolved as a continent has led to that.
But how is that shaping the future of the continent's economies?
Great point. The one thing that the youth are focusing on in Africa, and specifically South Africa, is using technology to leapfrog our shortcomings in other areas. So when we look at technologies that rolled out in Kenya, for example, we take M-Pesa, the mobile payment system. That happened before the world was using mobile payments. It happened in Kenya. And this is the type of technological advancement that the youth in Africa want to drive.
So this digital and mobile innovation plays a huge role in unlocking Africa.
Absolutely.
So let me come back. I want you to explain to our audience the enterprises, your family businesses, the things that you do, because you guys have over 10,000 employees in Cape Town. So you feed a lot of people. You give a lot of people stability. So talk about the businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fundamentally, it's about people. You know, we have over 40,000 dependents that rely on the Sekunjalo group and our different investments. And it's always been about the people. We founded the business, my father founded the business in 1997 with the ethos of, we just left apartheid. How do we go about uplifting the South African
And
and
let me
African
mention
people.
this to you, because I spent a lot of time in South Africa over my life. His father, Iqbal Surve, was the personal physician of Mandela until his death.
Exactly, and I'm glad you mentioned that because President Nelson Mandela played a very inspirational role in my life. And I had the opportunity to spend quite a lot of time with him at different stages in my life as well. And his lasting impression was something that led me to go on the journey of focusing on investment that can uplift people as well. So coming back to the Sekunjalo group and the different investments that we do and how we approach things, we have 3 strategic areas. Technology, first and foremost. As I mentioned, is the way that we see we can uplift the South African people. Secondly, in media. We own one of the largest media houses in Africa. And we do that because we believe media is the very epitome of democracy. It's not always in our favor, the media landscape, as it is in the US. There's multiple voices, but we always welcome that criticism because the point of having media and representing the South African voices, or in the US, the different voices that form part of the large country, is that we have to further democracy by furthering opinion. The freedom of speech is so important to us as a family. And the third area is focused on sustainability and impact investment around the continent.
I want to come back to your dad because Mandela encouraged him to abandon medicine and go into the entrepreneur economic space.
It was a tough decision. You know, the stories that my dad tells me about of that time, he loved being a doctor. He's always loved being a doctor. And he loved being a doctor because he could help people every day with his hands, helping them, their families. And so to make that transition to business was not something that he would have done himself. But because President Nelson Mandela asked my father to do so, he did. And the way that he asked it was what convinced my dad to do so. He said, South Africa no longer needs struggle activists. We no longer need people fighting a liberation battle. We've been liberated. We've become a democracy. What we need now is for our people to lead economic transformation in our country. And that is going to help South Africans.
How can global investors, Rayhaan, ensure their ventures empower local communities rather than exploit them?
I think the most important thing in dealing with investment into other countries is to always look at it from the perspective of partnership. In Africa, we've historically always had extractive relationships with Europe, with other parts of the world as well, where there's left nothing behind. And the narrative is changing now. If we look at Francophone Africa currently, if we look at Nigeria, they've changed the relationships they've had from moving from extractive to partnership. Nigeria now works with the largest oil players in the world in joint ventures to facilitate knowledge transfer, to build together, to build out infrastructure. And South Africa is the same. We've always worked very closely with the US in terms of investment into our country. And we've always done it with the ideal philosophy of partnership.
What is it going to take to lift so many South Africans out of poverty, where they have homes and an infrastructure and opportunities like everybody else around the globe?
It's definitely one of the biggest challenges we're facing at the moment. And it's not a new challenge. But one of the lenses in which I see we can do that is through entrepreneurship. I'm a very big advocate for allowing and teaching the inherent nature of South Africans who are entrepreneurial to be able to activate that and take themselves out of poverty. We need to provide the infrastructure, the support in order to allow them to do that. But I fundamentally believe that entrepreneurship will be the game changer in Africa.
But what role does government play in that?
Government plays a key role. They have to create the regulatory environment. They have to create the right programs and incentives. They have to assist in education, have to ensure that entrepreneurship is part of education. But government's role is also limited. And I think private has a much bigger role to play in facilitating that transition. Because private has the ability to move capital to work together, to support entrepreneurs, and to get it into the right areas that allow us to grow. And in that sense, I think that the private role in encouraging and uplifting people through entrepreneurship is unlimited.
You know, I was stunned at the number of young people that are unemployed in South Africa, and don't have that really access to early on education. I know you and your family do a lot in the communities there to change it. Can the government do more?
I think they can always do more, definitely. We like to support the government in helping them to do more in the education sector. We have our own programs in entrepreneurship. We provide scholarships and help students who are going to study in the public system to have the right environment, mentors, guidance, resources to study there. So we can do that together, certainly. But I do think that there's always more to do from an education perspective. And I say that because education to me and education to my family is the fundamentally most important thing that we can have.
Now, I think the question I really want to ask as we wrap this up are the biggest misconceptions not only international investors, but everyday people have about doing business in South Africa.
The biggest misconceptions, I would have to say that it's most likely the corruption. Everyone seems to think about Africa as being corrupt, and can't disagree with them because the narrative that comes out of Africa captures a lot of that. But that doesn't mean that's representative of the economy or the whole people. And that is why I think it's one of the biggest misconceptions. People in South Africa want to work together. They want to create value together. And that's why they want to have foreign partnerships come in. And corruption can easily be removed from the equation when we have that.
Listen, man, thank you so much. You're such an eloquent spokesperson for your country. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank all our guests today. I'm Armstrong Williams. Enjoy what remains of your weekend.